The Department of Commerce is asking drone pilots to educate them on drone operations. And we figured, who better to do this than you, drone pilots? And if some groups in the industry have their say, this could lead to restrictions on which drone you can purchase, whether you're flying for fun or flying for your business. And of course, this sounds like a daunting task, so in the next few minutes, we will help you understand what the Department of Commerce is doing, how it could affect you, and how you can voice your concerns. The Department of Commerce recently released this thing called an ANPRM, which is an Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and that's about drones and drone security. An ANPRM is really just a fancy acronym that says, we're about to propose a new rule, and we would like to hear from you first. So essentially, the Department of Commerce put out a series of questions in preparation for rulemaking. And to be clear, this ANPRM does not propose any rules at this time. This will be an NPRM in the future. But we need to have large and small industry members answer all of these questions, or at least as many as possible. Now, you wouldn't want some lobbying organization from Arlington, Virginia, who have never seen a drone up close to actually decide what is best for you and your business, right? So how do you voice your opinion? Glad you asked. By submitting a comment to the ANPRM. And it's actually pretty straightforward. Now, the problem with this ANPRM is that it has 50 questions, and not all of them are going to be applying to drone operators. So we picked the 11 most important ones that we believe you, as a US operator, should be answering. So let's go over each of them, and we're going to give you some pointers on how to formulate your response. Now, keep in mind here, I want to be clear, we are not telling you what to say. We are helping you with some talking points. We're also not giving you a canned response that you can copy-paste, because we know from experience that it is not the most effective way to do this. They will just take your comment, and as well as everybody else that has copy-pasted, and then count it as one comment. And then one more thing, stick to the questions only that are in that document. Do not voice your opinion about other things that is not being asked. Otherwise, your comment will be discarded. Now, we looked at the comments that have already been posted, and sadly, many of them don't answer the questions and will be disregarded. So if you left a comment, be sure that you go back and check your work after you watch this video. Joining me in this exercise is Vic Moss from the DSPA, the Drone Services Provider Alliance. He's an industry veteran, small business owner, and a drone operator. And Vic is actually going to help you with the first question. So grab your favorite word processing software. Let's get this done. Vic, let's talk about the first question.
Hi, Greg. And it'll be interesting to go through this. Don't get frustrated by them. In this first question that we decided is question number 8, and the ANPRM asks, in this section, the Bureau of Industry and Security, the BIS, identified threats posed by transactions involving information and communication technology and services, also called ICTS, integral to the UAS with a nexus to China or Russia. Has BIS fully captured and articulated the threat posed by transactions involving such ITS? And if not, what additional threats should BIS consider? Now, if you're like me, you had to look up the word nexus, and that basically means just connected to or a link or a tie or something like that. What this is essentially asking is whether or not threats have actually been identified or enough, or even if there are any additional threats. Here is a list of threats that BIS have allegedly identified that UAS manufacturers could engineer vulnerabilities into their product, exploiting existing vulnerabilities, or push malicious updates which would compromise these products without the UAS owner's knowledge. Another one would be to implement no-fly restrictions that would disable their UAS in conflict zones. If you disagree with these threats, you should start your answer by stating that you do not believe that BIS has really articulated the threats very well. Your answers should focus, again, this is not copy and paste, but in the latest National Defense Authorization Act, they have Section 1709, which calls for a security audit of both Autel and DJI that be completed in the next 12 months. So if there is an actual threat, then it can be addressed. And if there's not a threat, then there's no threats that need to be addressed. Pushing malicious updates, it would require that you're connected to the internet. And that's not something we're currently required to do to fly. Most people don't in one way or another. And then the implementation of no-fly restrictions would also require a connection to the internet, as proven by the recent GeoZone update completed by DJI nationwide. You could also You could also focus on the fact that DJI has removed geofencing rather than made it more restrictive. So these are some of the ways that you can address what question 8 asked.
The next question is question 11, and I'm going to read it to you and then we can talk about it. What are the potential trade-offs of a rule prohibiting the resale or the rental in the United States of UAS or UAS components, this is important, that are designed, developed, manufactured, or supplied by a person owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a foreign adversary? So I know this is a lot of words in here, but I think this one is pretty straightforward, doesn't really need to be reworded. If you currently own a recreational or a prosumer drone and you want to ever upgrade, I highly recommend that you respond to this question by explaining how this would affect your ability to continue doing your hobby or to run your business. Now, along with this answer, you can also emphasize on the fact that there are currently no non-Chinese consumer or prosumer drones that are available. We know there are American manufacturers, they're just not creating consumer and prosumer drones. And then you can also talk about how this would affect you and possibly your business. Now, if you are flying FPV, this is not the only thing, but if you flying FPV or you're building your own drone or you're flying model aircraft, not having access to UAS components that are manufactured in China would leave you with little to no options from manufacturers. You could also add something in here that's personal to me that I think is important, but you could request that a supply and demand study be conducted first in order to determine whether or not there are enough UAS and UAS components that are available from alternative suppliers. An immediate ban without that study, without finding out exactly what we can produce in the United States, could have a serious impact on the industry and in the economy, I think, as a whole.
The next question we came up with was 15. This is another one we thought would be really good for the industry to answer. Remember, you're educating the Commerce Department and then eventually lawmakers about this. So they ask, what are the general data collection capabilities of the UAS? What is the level of aggregation and scale of data that a UAS can collect on persons, entities, geography, and infrastructure? This is one of the questions that's kind of interesting, but when answering it, what you want to do is you want to emphasize the fact that off-the-shelf UAS, the drones we fly in the United States, whether for fun, whether for business, the vast majority of them, just basically an RGB sensor. They take pictures, they take videos, that kind of stuff. Some of the more specialized drones can do things like infrared capabilities. They might be able to sniff out chemicals, that kind of stuff. But stick to what you know when it comes to the drone stuff. And to answer the questions about the level of aggregation and scale, most off-the-shelf drones, they'll fly 30, 40 minutes, some less, maybe some a few more, but they're just collecting the data. To analyze the data and aggregate the data, you're actually putting it on a computer and running it through software. So the drone itself really isn't aggregating the data. So that's one of the interesting ways this question was asked. And make sure, based on some testimony we've seen, make sure that you let them know that the drones are capable of some things, but they're also not capable of other things, including things like measuring heartbeat and conducting facial recognition studies and that kind of stuff.
And then the next question that I think you should answer is 23. It says, which sensors in or on a UAS that are typically used in critical industries, for example, agriculture, chemical, construction, energy, or telecommunication. So which of these sensors are able to collect or transmit data and have connection capabilities? And yes, you've probably figured out by now this is a bit of a dumb question. Your answer could emphasize on the fact that all sensors have the capability to collect data because, well, it is the reason why we actually fly a drone with a sensor is to collect data. Now, as far as having connection capability, there is inherently every single drone has a connection capability because that's how you control the drone using radio waves. And of course, this is because the FAA requires that we have a pilot in command always in control of the aircraft. So you can reference 14 CFR Part 107.19. This is where the regulation lives for the PIC stuff. Now, I want you to possibly emphasize that the connection capabilities and the data transmission are not the same. Data that is collected via the sensor is stored on board of the aircraft, either internally or using a removable storage device, like, for example, an SD card.
Question 27 brings our phones into play, or our tablets, if you use that for flying a drone. So the question asks, how often are software applications related to the operation of UAS installed on a UAS user's phone or tablet? What policies govern the application's access to other information on the user's phone? In your answer here, you can explain whether or not you even use a phone or a tablet to fly. Personally, I use all my controllers have built-in screens, so I don't even connect to the internet, and I don't have cellular coverage. And if you do use a phone, do you put it in local data mode? DJI has the local data mode. Some of the other Autel and those might also as well. But is it in local data mode? Does it not transmit? Does it transmit? Are you in airplane mode? Answer these questions. Does the app share location services with other apps on the phone or the tablet? Does a user agreement specify that their app should share information with other apps? I'm not sure they do, so take a look at what yours does and answer accordingly. But make sure that if you are using a smart controller, RC Pro, whatever, or one of the Autel controllers, make sure that you specify that you're not using a phone, it's not connected to Wi-Fi, it's not connected to cellular, and explain why.
Question 28 is the next one that we should look at. What systems, sensors, or equipment do UAS and their affiliated UAS operators use when they're not navigating or storing data over mobile networks? And yes, we had to read that question about 10 times before I finally kind of somewhat understood what it meant. The bottom line here, whoever wrote this, I think, has really no idea how the data is handled from the drone to wherever the data is going after that. Now, in your answer, you probably can explain your flow when it comes to transferring the data from the drone all the way to your computer. Now, it seems to me like the Department of Commerce is under the impression that you must use a mobile network in order to transfer the data from the drone. For example, you can say that your sensor data is stored on an SD card on board of the aircraft, and that you take this SD card and then you put it on your computer, downloading the data straight from the SD card, and that you never really have to touch the drone for that, or even turn on the drone for that matter. Now, be sure to emphasize here that none of this process relies on a mobile network of any sort, or even a Wi-Fi network, quite frankly. Now remember that the folks that are reading this are not necessarily going to be computer savvy. Think about it like you're trying to explain this to your 80-year-old grandma. Remember, even the CEO of a small lobbying organization who has been pushing for the Chinese ban for a while has mentioned multiple times in hearings and other webinars that you need to connect to the internet in order to fly your drone. This is likely where this question is actually coming from.
Question 29 is really kind of the same thing as question 28, but it says internet instead of mobile networks. Again, it's also a confusing question, one of the ones you also have to read 2 or 3 times. We don't connect to the internet to fly. We don't have to connect to the internet to fly, contrary to popular opinion by some on the Hill. And if the person, I'm not sure if the person or committee who came up with this actually understands what we do with a drone. Again, it's very similar to what Greg just mentioned. But again, I also want to mention that if you are frustrated by these questions, please don't make it so obvious in the answers. It's just whoever's going to read that, it's just their job really to aggregate the information, aggregate the data. So again, it could very well be, you know what, this person's just being an idiot and I don't want to listen to their stuff. So be professional, be concise, answer the questions as they're asked. And this would probably be a good question to answer and reiterate or iterate if you have not yet, that in no point in any time but is data transmitted between the US and the computer via the internet when you're operating. And if you are frustrated by a lot of this stuff, reach out to your elected officials in DC. They're the ones you need to hear this.
Question 31 also talks a little bit about where the data is stored and all of that. So you might be repeating yourself, but that's fine because some people might choose to only answer some of these questions. So 31 says, where is the data stored on the physical UAS, if any? Where's the data that a UAS captures during the routine operation stored off the physical UAS? And how long is the data stored on and off the UAS platform? And again, these things might be obvious to you because you're flying a drone, but we've talked about where the data is stored on the UAS. This is another good place to reiterate that the data is stored on either the SD card or the internal memory of the aircraft. The data also is stored there until you decide to delete it. And once it's off the UAS, the data is stored wherever you want to put it until it's no longer needed by you or your company or whatever you're using the data for. So if you have specific policies of, on how long you retain the data, it's probably a good place to share it right here.
Question 47 is our next one here. And this one also might be one where you want to editorialize. And I will say again, please don't. As tempting as it is, trust me, I know how tempting that is. Question 47 asks, what, if any, anti-competitive effects may result from the regulation of transactions involving foreign adversary ICTS integral to the UAS as contemplated by this ANPRM. A lot of words there. And what, if any, can be done to mitigate the anti-competitive effects? Anti-competitive is incredibly generous here. Let's reword the question a little bit. What they're asking is, what are the negative consequences of reducing competition by banning Chinese drone? Here are a few points you can bring up. One, fewer offerings at a higher price to public safety and government results in more taxpayer money spent. I might even add the word a waste of taxpayer money in here. That's not necessarily editorial. Another point of response might be that there are no available consumer or prosumer drones. Greg mentioned it earlier, and it's a good time to go ahead and reiterate it again. Reiterate it again. The vast majority of small business and virtually all recreational users use Chinese drones. So there's nothing on the market that we can replace our current drones with. Either way, you can also, GAO put out a great report a while back, really kind of diving into what the Interior Department ended up having to do when they are no longer allowed to use Chinese drones. You can find, there's going to be a link below here. You can do that. Read that report. It's a great place to find some quotes that you can kind of hammer this home with. Here are a couple, really. One, BLM and NPS. This is directly from the report. BLM and NPS do not have enough drones for their operations to manage or prevent wildland fires, something very, very, very apropos at the moment, and have shifted some operations to riskier, more costly methods such as helicopters, according to officials. That was one quote. The next quote, FWS canceled a planned project to collect aerial images for restoration efforts after the Swan Lake fire in Alaska, according to officials. The officials said numerous hazards made the area unsafe for working on foot. So the fact that they couldn't use what they needed to use basically canceled that entire project. And some of the other points are DJI will continue to innovate and sell products in the rest of the world regardless of a U.S. ban. So we're going to fall further behind technologically. It's just that simple. And that would be definitely part of an anti-competitiveness issue. And there are really minimal incentives for other manufacturers to create a better product if the best product on the market or best product in the world is not available in the market. To beat the best product on the world, you have to be better. To beat your competition, if the best product is not available to you, is all you have to do is be good enough, and good enough is not safe when it comes to flying in the drones in the NAS.
And I think I want to add to that as well. I think the economic impact, which I'm going to talk about with question 49 here, is likely where the Department of Commerce is going to be very interested to hear how you feel. So very important that when you write these things, make it very personal, make it very about how this will impact your day-to-day operation, your job, your income, your future, and in your life. So question 49, it actually says, what additional economic impact to U.S. businesses or the public, if any, might be associated with the regulation of transaction involving foreign adversary ICTS integral to UAS contemplated by this ANPRM. Now for this one, again, you need to make it personal. Talk about what it would do to your business. Talk about what it would do to, if you're a first responder, for example, if you work for an agency that couldn't get the best equipment that they can use to save a life or to find lost people. Talk about what possibly could happen if you're a fire captain that wasn't able to use a reliable infrared drone to see through some smoke of a fire in order to find out where it's safe for firefighters to go in or to save your house from a fire. Talk about how this would affect your hobby. Be as personal as you can. And here, the more personal, I think, the better.
And our last question here is question number 50, literally the last question in the ANPRM as well. It asks, what actions can BIS take or provisions could it add to any proposed regulation to minimize potential costs borne by U.S. businesses or the public? This kind of assumes there's actually an answer to this question. I really don't think of a way the Commerce Department can really minimize potential costs. And you can explain to them this as well. But suppose Suppose the government went ahead and did the regulation was written so the government had to have a buyback program. They buy our drones, our Chinese drones, in order for us to buy an American drone. What amount of money would you get for your Chinese drone? And then could you then turn around and buy a comparable American drone, assuming one is available, as we've mentioned more than once, which is something that needs to be mentioned more than once. And it actually, it's an interesting assumption that the U.S. government actually has the ability to minimize the cost of replacing our fleets. Where do they get that authority? I guess that's the question. Buybacks, tariffs is one thing that is currently in the news. And speaking of tariffs, one possibility would be that we already pay an extra 25% for all our Chinese drones, not just DJI and Autel, but all Chinese drones that come in the United States. We currently pay a 25% tariff. If it's possible, I don't think the Commerce Department could do this. They would have to do. It would have to be via Congress. But right now, it's going to the general fund. So maybe something you could suggest would be you take that 25% we're already paying, already going into the government, and set that aside. Set it aside for U.S. drone manufacturers. Whatever. Slightly off topic, but that might be a good way to reduce some of the potential cost borne by U.S. businesses or the public, which the public basically means taxpayers.
Now you've gotten this far in the video, let's go ahead and talk about how you submit your response. Hopefully you can craft something really nice, but start by sharing your background. At the beginning of your letter, share your background, your experience, your knowledge before you answer the questions that you decide to pick. Keep it short and specific to UAS, that's your background and your experience. Next up, copy-paste the question number and the question, and then answer it clearly and concisely below it, and then do this as many times as you can. And when you're ready, create a PDF, email it to the email address that we're going to put right here. I'm not going to read it. You can put it right here, and then we'll put it in the description as well, including RIN 0694-AJ72. That's the reference number in the subject line. And then make sure that you submit all of this before March 4th of 2025. And if you want additional information in a written format, I'm going to put a link to the full DSPA article down here in the description. Good luck, and may the odds be ever in your favor.